a while ago it used to be seniority, it used to be financial security, and now it's suddenly gone on to cricket culture.
When we talk about institutional racism, it's not just racism. It's about women. It's about the class system in England to this day, and it's about race. It's anyone who doesn't fit in.
I've worked in the Indian media for 10.5 years. You don't generally end up writing about domestic violence, and yeah, of course we've had a few cases in the last few years, and maybe it doesn't even come to the fore. As you well know, Abhinav, a lot of things with Indian cricket especially gets kind of swept under the carpet at a very early nascent level. It gets nipped in the bud. But here, some of the things that, like I said, the AFL guys or the NRL guys do, not just here, they go overseas, they'll get into fights in bars, and it'll be on the news, but 3 days later or say 3 weeks later, they'll be playing, and on commentary, he'll be like, he's a star, mate. He's a star. He's done this. He's taken a specky, mate. And you're like, wait, but is this the same guy? I actually generally go back to the news story and check. I'm like, yeah, I mean, but he did this. How is he, suddenly a star again?
I don't want to be the whistleblower either. I don't want to be known. There are many guys who don't want to be the Azim Rafiqs. They don't want to go to a journalist and say, this is what happened. For all you know, they might never play cricket again.
When I moved here, I was told by a lot of senior Indian journalists that, you won't fit in because, Australian press boxes do it differently. On the first day, they have to wear a suit and they wear this and that. You won't fit in.
Those sorts of people who fit into that sort of Southern African, Australian, New Zealand, English professional culture, everyone else is another. And that doesn't matter if you're Jofra Archer and you're clearly one of the best players in the world, or if you just happen to be a different kind of personality.
There's a shift in cricket culture, and what's been happening around the cricketing world. Jarrod, one of your good friends, broke out, I think both your good friends, they broke out a story of institutional racism in Yorkshire, SJN hearings that's going on in South Africa, and Mohammad Shami was abused, not for his bad performance, but for the fact that he was a Muslim. So, and who can forget the latest of them all, the Tim Payne story. So I want to talk about something that I feel is very, very relevant to this day and age of cricket. Because a while ago it used to be seniority, it used to be financial security, and now it's suddenly gone on to cricket culture. Do we actually have a culture? Do we actually... is there a culture? Is there a rule that we follow? The term sportsman's spirit, all of that is thrown around a lot. But I've always wanted to do this, guys. Like, call upon two stalwarts and grill them. Like, I've been to multiple press conferences and you get the most obscure questions, possibly from both of you guys. I've never been in a press conference with you, Jarrod, but Bharat's always the creepy guy, like watching from the corner. So I would love to ask your opinion. I'd want to talk more about this because I think it's not only a relevant topic, but I don't think there's a lot of literature around it. Because when you're growing up as a young kid, you're in a team full of boys. You're bound to have bullying. You're now even girls are in it. So there's a lot of scope for a kid to be harassed, and that could take a heavy toll mentally. I want to know more, Jarrod, about, I'll come to you first. I want to know more about the Azim Rafiq incident in general. What's the take back there in England? What does institutional racism actually mean?
Yeah, I think the important thing with Azim Rafiq is, and I wrote this before they found dirt on him, was that it's not ever been about him. I moved over to the UK in 2008, and one of the first things I was told is that Adil Rashid had a bad attitude. That's why he wasn't in the English team, despite the fact that I think in his first few one days, he almost won one game with the bat and bowled brilliantly in the other game and was suddenly dropped. And there was no reason, and no one seemed to follow it up. It didn't make any sense. So you had this young all-round leg spinner that wasn't playing, and when I did ask around, bad attitude. And I think what actually happened is that English cricket was completely stuck in this amateur professional mind frame, even in the years after amateur cricket stopped and the posh people stopped running cricket, sort of. there was still, you listen to Michael Vaughan when he was defending himself for his racist behaviour, and he was talking about having to knock on the door of the change room, right, to be able to go into it. There was a real culture shift from that, based on really Australian, New Zealand, South African, maybe even Zimbabwean players coming in and going, mate, if you're good enough to be in the team, you get to sit in the main change room. And so it basically went from this amateur sport where posh people run it and professionals worked, to a professional sport which had a real Southern African, Australian, New Zealand feel to it, right? And that was hard as nails. You had to be able to have a beer at the end of the day, all those sorts of things. And that went unchecked, really, for a very long time in all these teams. And so what it means is that they still have fines meetings. You know what a fines meeting is, Abhinav, I'm sure? Yeah. They're ridiculous things where generally the white players in the team or the drinking players in the team get together and they fine each other for things like weird sexual things that they did on tours, and who wore a hat the wrong way, and all these sorts of things. And there's no professional working environment. There's no, the WhatsApp groups are out of control. If you've got a lot of team WhatsApp groups, and it's basically, there hasn't been an adult in the room. So it went from amateur to professional, but the professionals who sort of ran the cricket culture came from a big, heavy drinking, Southern Hemisphere cricket culture. And then you fuse that in with workaday England players. And you know the sort of players I'm talking about, Abhinav, the sort of guys that sort of grizzled 35-year-old veteran sort of players. Know everything about cricket, but probably aren't the person you want to go to if you want to come out as homosexual, or if you think you're being bullied by someone else in the team, or if you're having trouble with the culture of it. And that's when you look at what happened with Yorkshire. There's a cultural problem there of Azim Rafiq talked about Joe Root being around when racial slurs were used. Who would Joe Root, and I'm talking about the younger Joe Root, not England captain Joe Root, but who does Joe Root go to in that situation if there's no adult around and everyone's just like, mate, yeah, we'll have a word with him. There's no tribunal or everything. So when we talk about institutional racism, it's not just racism. It's about women, it's about the class system in England to this day, and it's about race. It's anyone who doesn't fit in to that, we'll have a beer at the end of the day's play, and you can yell and abuse me as much as you want on the training field, and I'll keep smiling and keep trying really hard. And I won't speak back to you. It's those sorts of people who fit into that sort of Southern African, Australian, New Zealand, English professional culture. Everyone else is another. And that doesn't matter if you're Jofra Archer and you're clearly one of the best players in the world, or if you just happen to be a different kind of personality, right? And that's where the racism and the systemic problems within English cricket are, because they never fix the original problem. They just let a bunch of people come in and go, we'll have a beer at the end of the day and we'll work this out. And that's not how everyone works. And certainly if you're not from those sorts of backgrounds, I can imagine how you feel like you are someone else. And then if no one's in charge, anyone's personal problems, anyone's personal religious beliefs, racial beliefs, misogynist beliefs come out, and I think that's what we've seen in English cricket, and it's not just an English cricket problem, let's be honest.
Yes, and this is the longest I've stayed quiet, so it takes someone of Jarrod's ability to do that, but full credit to him. It's not the first time he's doing it, but look, I think the thing with the whole Tim Payne thing, and it's been fascinating for me to understand how things work here in Australia with regards to their cricket. It's so different to how they deal with athletes in other sports, especially their footy codes. And I've been amazed by it. I mean, some of the things that those guys do and get, are found guilty of doing. And then 2-3 days later or 2-3 weeks later, they're back, play. Has Abhinav left us?
He has left us. You just keep going. You are on fire. You're doing great. We don't need the host.
I know, exactly. This is what happens, right? He thought he'll have us on his show, apparently. Oh, he's back.
Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
I can't see Jared. So where were we? We were at Bharat.
Where was that? Yeah, and some of the things that these guys from the footy codes get away with, it's just amazing, especially for people like you and me, Abhinav, who in India We're not used to things like that appearing in the newspapers. I've worked in the Indian media for 10.5 years. You don't generally end up writing about domestic violence, and yeah, of course we've had a few cases in the last few years, and maybe it doesn't even come to the fore. As you well know, Abhinav, a lot of things with Indian cricket especially gets kind of swept under the carpet at a very early nascent level. It gets nipped in the bud. But here, some of the things that, like I said, the AFL guys or the NRL guys do, not just here, they go overseas, they'll get into fights in bars, and it'll be on the news, but 3 days later, or say 3 weeks later, they'll be playing, and on commentary, it'll be like, he's a star, mate, he's a star, he's done this, he's taken a specky, mate, and you're like, wait, but is this the same guy? I actually generally go back to the news story and check. I'm like, yeah, I mean, but he did this. How is he, suddenly a star again? And why I bring that up is the same levels of standards of integrity and all which is expected from cricketers is vastly different. For some reason in Australia, cricketers are held up to this level where they're supposed to be, play by the rules, play hard, as Ravi Shastri would say, play tough. But, off the field, you're supposed to almost have this kind of very relatable personality. You hear stories about, there's this whole tall poppy syndrome here. That's why Michael Clarke was not the most popular of Australian captains, because he dated a model or whatever. It's not someone that a common man on the street in Australia could relate with. But they expect the cricketers to be humble and modest and grounded and all that. And you can't have any slip-ups. So then Sandpaper Gate happens. And then the whole thing is about this culture change. And I still think banning Steve Smith and David Warner for 1 year was a joke. I mean, that was the greatest overreaction ever. I mean, if that was true, Faf du Plessis should have never played again. I mean, he was caught on camera doing stuff twice in 2 years, if we go back to that period. But nothing happened to him. So that was an overreaction. And then coming to Tim Payne, and I wrote this piece 2 days ago, they suddenly have to find someone to fit that bill, like for their own sake, almost to cover up for their own blemishes. So they just find this Tim Payne, because there's nobody else in that team who could go to at that point. You make him captain, and you almost tag this whole savior complex with him, saying he's this reformer, everything will be fine, he'll go and shake hands after the toss and after the national anthems, and you load him with all this pressure. And then, as we now know, you get to hear that there's this complaint about him, and you investigate it. Now you're hearing that he fully cooperated, you investigated it, and his name was cleared, and you don't tell anyone about it. So Tim Payne has gone for 3 years, knowing, as he's now said in interviews as well, knowing that it could come out anytime. And that's the truth with any kind of genitalia pictures when you send it to someone you don't know, or someone you're not close to, or someone who's not family. You're
Sounds
no
like
longer
an expert talking.
No, I'm just saying, having read and heard so much about, I haven't read too much about Dick Pic, sorry, but I'm just saying, you're no longer in control. You're just almost hoping that, it never comes out. But unfortunately, Cricket Australia was also just hoping that it never comes out. And you knew whenever it would come out, and inevitably it was going to come out, it would be Tim Payne's head on the line, because you built him up saying that, nothing can happen to him. I mean, he can do no wrong. So as a result, when it's happened, when the news has broken now, there was more a sense of how dare he? Otherwise, it would have been how could he? Why Tim Payne? He's a role model. He shouldn't be doing these things. But now it's almost well, wait, Australian cricket, you made us live a lie for this long, saying that this guy is pristine and pure. Almost one of those characters from our Indian mythological stories, right, Abhinav? He can do no wrong. He's got all the best characteristics out. He's got all the right virtues. And then, he looks like an even bigger villain than he was. And like you correctly said, Abhinav, once his wife has forgiven him, I think, does anyone else really matter? Not in my book, unless it's something much more serious. And which takes me back to what I started my point with, which is what the footy guys and a lot of them are found guilty of, but nothing seems to happen to them.
Yeah, I think he's kind of smashed the nail on its head, because I can only think of, when you were talking about it, and you're talking about Indian mythology, I watch a lot of Marvel shows, and how Captain America, and once Steve Rogers went, which is Steve Smith in this case, in after Sandpaper Gate. They brought in a new guy, and he was made to look like the hero that he was, but he wasn't. And the truth is, everyone else knew that there was a lot going on. And I, for one, I played on multiple teams, and when the ball's being tampered, the fact that only 3 people were down for it is something that I couldn't believe. There were allegations, of course, and
there are 25 people who know about it. Do you know what I mean? There are 25 people minimum who knew about this.
Exactly.
Tim Payne was one of them.
I don't want to even argue on that point, but I think captaincy or being a player is so much different from being a coach. You have a lot in control when you're a captain or a player. So which is why I don't even want to go back to Justin Langer's dark past in that sense, where when he didn't walk, he flicked off a bail. All that's forgiven, forgotten, all of that's done. But what is this promise of elite honesty, Jarrod? Like, they came out with a big show, big series, and really it just feels like it's completely let down, right? Especially after one of their biggest moments. They've just won a World Cup.
Look, they spent a lot of time talking, and you get this if you're in Australian cricket. I'm sure Bharat knows what I'm talking about here. They spent a lot of time in Australia talking about good blokes. And there's this idea and I think Bharat, that's kind of what he was skirting around, which is you have to be really hard on the field, but then you have to be a good bloke off the field, right? And Tim Payne was one of those players that they decided that's what he was going to be. He was going to be marketed as Mr. Good Bloke, and that was what it was going to be. And that's what they needed after Sandpaper Gate. But the truth is, again, I'm not sure that I've ever been in a cricket environment, no matter what the country, where empathy is in any way encouraged, where sympathy is practiced, where an understanding of different people is practiced. And so generally what you have is, whatever the prevailing bullshit is in any particular cricket culture, that becomes the thing that everyone...
Is there place though for it, Jarrod? I'm just going to butt in there. Is there place though for it in professional sport? With all the competition, survival of the fittest, is there place for empathy and sympathy in professional sport?
There has to be, because they're still human beings. Right? If you don't do that, what you create is a bunch of very flawed human beings, right? Look, professional sport is such a weird thing. Essentially what we are saying to you, Abhinav, when you come through is you're very talented. We're going to use your body up for 14 years. That's what we're going to do, right? There has to be that agreement going in, right? You're a batter, so you'll be fine. But if you're a fast bowler or, a footballer or something, you may not be able to walk at the end of your career. If you're a wicketkeeper, you may not have hands. All these sorts of things are part of it. But if you don't try and actually understand who people are and that people come from different backgrounds, right, and you try and put everyone into the same cookie cutter, what ends up happening is, look, I wrote about this in 2019. Tim Payne's not a special person. Like, I don't mean this in a bad way. This was before I knew about, the text, and I'm with Bharat. I don't care that much about them. He's not a special person. He's another human being trying to get by. The minute they tried to make him into something that he wasn't, which he had to be, to fit the culture that the Australian cricket wanted, right, you set people up to fail. And I think that problem, in Tim Payne's case, comes out with a bunch of texts, right? But it's the same problem that Azim Rafiq was trying to fit into in Yorkshire. It's the same problem that you hear at the SJN hearings. It's the same problem that, that we have seen with young Indian cricketers who don't make it. It's the same. You either fit in or it's broken. And realistically, what you really want in professional sport is you want the most talented people to get to the top. The survival of the fittest aspect, it should be there in your performance and how hard you train and all those sorts of things. It shouldn't be there in whether you want to drink a beer on a Tuesday night with someone. It shouldn't be there based on if you're sending text messages to women who aren't your wife and all those sorts of other things. And there's a big problem. I think that if you look at professional sport, there's basically 3 main things that none of us will be able to handle, right? Which is corruption in sport, which is not going to go away as long as there's money involved. The other one is, I personally believe the next big thing is going to be pedophilia, that so many coaches groom young players. And we're starting to see that come out in Australian sport starting to come out, American sport, English sport. I can't believe that's not going to come out in other countries next. And the other one is drugs, right? None of us are going to be able to fix those problems. What we can say is, can we make these environments more professional so that everyone there is treated like a normal employee? You are an employee of your state association, your IPL team, your national team. That is not how cricket teams are run. I've worked in them. My wife is a lawyer, and she pulls her hair out when I tell her story. She goes, you cannot do that in a workplace environment. Oh, I'm not even saying be special. I'm saying just be a normal workplace environment. that is not what cricket is trying to do at the moment.
Yeah,
but
well-
if I can just come in there, and it's a very cultural thing as well, right? Like what Jarrod is saying is absolutely right. It should happen. You know, it's sad that the international cricketer we do have on this show, who's actually the host, is asking whether there is place for empathy, considering he's been in that position. And maybe there were times when he needed empathy. We needed someone to put his arm over his shoulder, but he didn't get it because in India, forget about mental health and all. Even like if you show a little bit of weakness in anything, that's it, you're finished. And Abhinav and I have spent many hours talking about this, off air. There is no support system for you. I'm not saying it's great in Australia or England, but at least they talk about it. At least they talk about having someone in place to where you can talk, forget about deep things like your sexual orientation or anything else. Here you're talking about just, I'm not feeling right. Even to say that would be your first, the first step towards getting out of the team. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, the point again goes back to that, right? So there are about 5 people who can replace you in Australia, probably 10 in England. Here there are about 350 or 3,500 people who can take your spot. So it's again, I'm talking about survival of the fittest more. But what I wanted to, coming from what Jarrod said is, he said there should be place for you to go and say this out in a comfortable environment. But I don't want to be the whistleblower either. I don't want to be known. There are many guys who don't want to be the Azim Rafiqs. They don't want to go to a journalist and say, this is what happened. For all you know, they might never play cricket again. But I'm sure you would have seen so much growing up in Mumbai. You would have seen so many players. I know of many who've come up to the under-19 ranks and have just disappeared, right? So what is the solution for in such a high-profile sport like us?
Look, I think the solution is talking, really. I mean, it's as basic as that. Talking and being allowed to talk. And having that kind of a dressing room set up, or if not dressing room, at least have that additional support system at every level, at junior level, right up to senior club cricket level, first class cricket and test cricket. I think right now, at least in international teams, you would like to believe that whether it's India or England or Australia, at least the bigger teams, they have mental health coaches and other guys who you can maybe at least open up to. I mean, India had Paddy Upton for a long time, and you played for India at a time. Paddy Upton was part of the team, if I'm not wrong, Abhinav. So at least those things are there. But at the lower level where you lose most of these guys, like you said, especially in India, but I think it's true here as well, from what I've learned after, speaking to people, even umpiring at junior level, you can kind of make out why. And just about that whole fitting in thing, I always find it fascinating because when I moved here, I was told by a lot of senior Indian journalists that, you won't fit in because, Australian press boxes do it differently. On the first day, they have to wear a suit and they wear this and that. You won't fit in. And I was like, well, I can't do that. If I don't fit in, I don't fit in. I mean, I don't think my visa is based on whether I fit into the press box or not. And as it turned out, these days they've started wearing clothes like me, kicking their shoes off and walking barefoot. Earthing has started in the Australian press boxes. But I'm talking about, I don't have to go out there and perform in the heat or, have that pressure of being dropped or whether of staying fit. I can, it's a different environment. But I can totally relate with someone from the subcontinent, whether you're born there or not, whether you're like someone like an Azim Rafiq or an Adil Rashid, how difficult it must be for them to fit in. I mean, I know friends here who are of Indian origin, who are born and brought up here. They change when they're with me, and then, you put them in a crowd of Australians, suddenly they start sounding different. They suddenly want to talk more about, my footy team made, this NRL team did this. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, it's so deeply ingrained that if I'm with a bunch of white people, I need to do this to fit in. I think it's easier when you come from outside, when you have, created your own identity, where you're freed up of those things. At least, not for all of us. I'm sure there are some Indians who still feel that I need to speak in an accent or be a certain way. But that doesn't happen. And I know I've digressed, but to bring it back to what we were talking about, it's the same thing. I mean, Justin Langer told me in an interview that he wants people to be different. He wants different characters to come into his team. And he said that, mate, when I got into the Australian team, the only thing I wanted to do was I wanted Mark Taylor to know that I can bat well. I wanted them to tell me that, oh, you are really good at batting. And after a point, because that was the culture that was prevalent back then. And then I told myself after the point, there's no point proving myself to these guys. I just need to prove to myself that I belong at this level. Okay, this is like 20, 30 years back. But that system is still the same, I think, in India especially. I think it's still the same in junior cricket in Australia and in England. So unless you have a system where people can just come out and speak openly about, let's start with cricket, and then you bring it down to other things about their lifestyle choices and all that. Unless that happens, people will continue to get lost.
Yeah, I think that's very fascinating because as I started my career quite early, about 17, 18, you don't have time to attend schools, you don't have time to attend colleges, and you're not in the proper educational system as such because you don't have time for such things if you want to play professional sport. And I think fitting in, almost like, it seems quite ironical that English players, there are people of Indian or Pakistani origin or some other origin, are trying to fit into English counties because the English team is practically from different parts of the world. And it just so much feels like, Jarrod, I have to ask you this because I've gotten Bharat's opinion. You've lived in England for so long. Do you actually feel like it's home?
I feel like London's home. Is maybe the better way of putting it. I don't know if the rest of the country really feels like my home. London's such an incredible city. There are so many people from so many different backgrounds here. I don't know if I've lived anywhere else in the UK. I don't really feel English, if that makes sense. I think how long? I lived here for 13, 14 years now, and I don't think I'll ever feel English. I don't really understand that. Look, I'll give you a really good example too of I'm a white, straight, Australian person who is very well known in cricket, and I can't even get a job interview for major positions in UK publications. Part of the reason is because I don't fit in, and I haven't played the game, and I don't go to the bars and have drinks with the editors and everything, right? Like, the othering is, it works on every level. It works for someone like Adam Zampa, who walks around in a toga, drinking from his homemade coffee cups. All the way through to, Adil Rashid and Moeen Ali. Like, there's that sort of thing. It's part of the culture. But as far as England goes as well, I am seen as an outsider who came here rather than someone who is from here. I remember this is a real weird tangent, but I think Bharat might know the person I'm talking about. There was a Australian documentary maker called John Safran who makes a lot of very weird, funny, controversial documentaries. And I remember him saying years ago that if you look at Australia and America, once you assimilate to the culture, your background sort of is, there might be racism, but it's like, well, he's coming to the NFL game, or he's got a footy team, and he's drinking beer, right? He's one of us. Anyone who doesn't do that is completely outside the whole time. Whereas in the UK and France, they have a different way of doing it. My wife is born and bred, born in the UK, of Sri Lankan heritage, and she is considered British Asian. And like, she went to Oxford and Cambridge and sounds as posh as anything, and so there's different ways that all these different cultures deal with immigration and outsiders and other ways. We're not, in a certain level, some of the problems that we've talked about so far are cricket related, right? But there is actually just there is a culture thing within all these different countries as well. You look at South Africa and the rainbow nature. They're so desperate to bring everyone in that they haven't actually looked at what that means. What does it mean to make sure that everyone can rise up in South Africa? And they haven't really, done that. And in England, they're, so desperate to be, again, a multiracial, multi-background sort of place. And it's like, well, what does that mean if a good percentage of kids from immigration, have to get their food paid for by the government? Like, what are you actually saying? And I think there are deeper problems here. And then you put on the whole thing. You guys were talking over and over again. My history of working with cricket teams, it's shocking to me how little they actually talk to each other, how much information. One of the most on-point stories, and it'd be really interesting to get your view on this, Abhinav. One of the most on-point stories from the Azim Rafiq story wasn't the racism. I kind of expected that. It wasn't the structural problems. I kind of have worked at cricket a lot. The one that I thought everyone should have been picking up was the fact that when his child was stillborn, the whole club wasn't told about that.
Yeah.
That is when you are treating cricketers like they're humans, that is when you're treating cricketers like it is a workplace. If that was a normal workplace, that message would have been put around very discreetly to everyone, just so that you all know this has happened. He doesn't want to talk about it. He does want to talk about it. Whatever you want. That's how workplaces should work. That's why talking matters, and that's why communication matters. It's not just about performance on the field.
I'm apologetic about this, Jarrod, because I don't think we thought of that as an option as cricketers, because talking essentially means, is someone going to take that in the wrong sense? You go talk to a coach, you probably get dropped. You go talk to someone in the environment, you probably lose your spot. So I actually had this chat this morning. I was called to speak to the under 19 Tamil Nadu boys over the next couple of days, and I was thinking back at my journeys in 17, 18, and I was just telling my wife I wasn't scoring any runs in the under 17 cricket. I was crying in a ground and I didn't know what to do. So the first question she did ask me was, who did you go speak to? And that's when it hit me. I was like, I didn't speak to anyone. I just kept it to myself. It boiled up. And I went there and I just showed my frustration on the runs. It worked for me, but it wouldn't work for a million other people. And that's where I think I've heard a lot of great lines going around. But I want to ask this to both of you. Maybe first, Bharat, it's a small country. Like only 6 states play your domestic cricket. It's so much easier building a system. And do you think the system needs to incorporate all of these values that I'm talking about? For India, it's a much bigger deal. For England, it's even bigger. So do you think empathy, sympathy, having an open channel of communication, is there something that you could compile? You guys are working in cricket all around. Why hasn't anyone compiled something where people can go even discreetly? That's something that I would like to ask you guys about.
I mean, the fact that we've had one international or male cricketer who's come out openly and said he's homosexual in the last how many years of cricket. I think Stephen Davies is the only guy who's done that. I don't think anybody else has done that. Tells you everything you need to know about that, Abhinav. I'm sure there are many more, but I don't think that channel is open yet, at least in cricket. Actually, if you look around the world in male sport or men's sport, really, where you can just come out and talk about it, but definitely not in cricket. And yeah, I mean, a lot of good things get spoken about, especially in Australia, because they do a lot of press conferences also. You just sit in and listen to, especially when the Cricket Australia guys speak. They speak a lot about these systems in place for a lot of things, for inclusivity and to bring people from different cultures, like the national team or the state team should represent the multiculturalism that exists in Australia. But even that, when you see I was asking someone the other day, like when I umpire games at junior level in Adelaide, there are so many Indian origin kids who play and do really well. But then I don't think there's ever been an Indian origin player who's played for South Australia, or not for a long time, or maybe never. And I am asking someone why. And they're all like, no, at some level they get lost. And it's not just in Australia. I remember doing this story when I was in New Zealand last year. Tarun Netula, who played, I think, a handful of games for New Zealand, who moved from Hyderabad originally. Yeah. So he had just set up this whole club or system where these cricketers or young cricketers from subcontinental origin or people who are moved from there can get together and play. Because he was like, they're so almost scared at some level to even talk to people who run the sport and ask for things like, we need a proper pitch, or we need a proper ground, we need some nets. There is that big division there. Maybe it's in their head, maybe the channels aren't as open as they should be for that to happen, and as a result of that, they're just being cut off. They play in their own leagues, they just exist in their own ecosystem. At least it's better in New Zealand than it is here. And recently you had Usman Khawaja talk about he wants more people of brown color, if I can say that, come in and play at the state level, and maybe then go on to play for Australia. We've seen it happen in the last 10 years. 2 or 3 have come and done that, starting with Usman Khawaja, but it doesn't happen. So I think inclusivity is one thing, but again, it goes back to what Jarrod and I have been talking about. You need a place to go to where you can talk openly about these things and freely and ask for what you want. And similarly, if you are a player who's made the cut, and like you said, 6 state teams, it should technically be much easier here than in India, where there are so many cultural issues as well. And I don't know enough about the English system to comment on it, but it should be easier for people to just, like an Adam Zampa, to just be. It should have been easier for him to be himself, because I was doing a story on Adam Zampa recently. I spoke to a couple of his club mates. So it's funny, guys who played with him, his teammates are like, we really don't know why they say Zams is weird. But at the same time, when I spoke to a couple of the senior guys in the club who, at the manager level, they're all like, yeah, he was a strange guy, mate. Like, I remember this one time we had won a game, and he came and hugged me. Because I asked him, what do you mean by weird? Why do you think he's weird? He hugged me, and then he started kissing me on the cheek. And I was like, what are you doing, Zams? And there's a generational thing there as well. But already, like, you could sense that here was a young kid from New South Wales, who had struggled to fit in. And then, it was different with his teammates. But if Zampa had got into some issue, if he wanted to talk to someone, he had nobody. And he is, from whatever I've heard, a very private person anyway. So I think a lot of things get spoken about, like you said, Abhinav, and Jarrod, I'm sure, has heard much more than I have when it comes to Cricket Australia or Australian cricket. But I don't know whether those systems are in place. And see, in India, it's more out of fear that you don't want to go and talk to anyone, right? About being, you might get lost. I mean, that's why a lot of, without naming anyone, Indian cricketers over the years have had journalist friends. Someone they can just vent out to, call and say, okay, this is the reason I was dropped, or this is the reason they're not picking me. Don't write it, okay? If you want to, you write it, but don't name me. It shouldn't come across like I have told you. Those things have happened because they can't go anywhere and say. Here, I think it's more about, from what I've seen, and Jarrod can correct me, of course, it's more about, it's people don't seem to get, why should you speak about mental health? Like, why should you have issues? Like, it's sport, mate. Like, you play it hard, you play it, it's a bloke thing. That word, I think maybe over time, once they move on from using the bloke word, is when I guess Australian cricket will get a little softer. That's my opinion, because every time bloke comes up, it's almost there's this machismo that gets involved with playing sport. And that's the feeling I've got anyway.
If you listen to the SJN hearings and you listen to Azim, Rafiq and Abhinav, I've talked to you and other Indian cricketers coming up, the one thing that I think is the problem is that, and you could read it really clearly in Michael Vaughan's non-apology. No, it wasn't even a non-apology, was it? He was actually saying he didn't say the thing that he said. Is that what happens is someone like you, Abhinav, gets through the series, the system. As you said, you might be a 1 in 1,000 shot that you make it through, right? And people then start to go, well, I made it through and I had to struggle, right? So what that means that the next person should have to do the same. And I think there's a big part of that. And the SJN hearings were very clear with that, of like, oh, it's tough for a white player to make it through the system as well. And the Morkel brothers and Dale Steyn, they came from nowhere and they toughed it out. So why can't the young black players tough it out? Rather than looking at it from the other point of view, which is, if we just open it up and we allow everyone to have a go, and it suddenly becomes about the most talented, and we give everyone that, the person who gets through won't be the grizzled 25-year-old with a chip on their shoulder who already hates the media, who already hates their coaches, who already hates their state association, right? Who already do you know what I mean? And you and I know, like, you're laughing, you already know who I'm talking about. In your head, you're already picturing about 25 people the minute I say that, right?
Yeah.
That is, what happens is, when you have a hard system, right, which is survival of the fittest, the people who get through protect that system, because they're like, well, I got through it, rather than doing something else. And I think what people like me and Bharat have tried to do in the cricket media, because to a certain extent, weirdly, the cricket media is probably more like Indian cricket than it is Australian cricket or English cricket, because there are so many people in the world who aren't very talented at cricket, but could become cricket writers or cricket broadcasters or all these sorts of things. And some of my friends are so upset with me when I help out young journalists and try and prop people up. And they're like, well, no one ever helped me when I came through. And I'm like, that's why I'm helping. I never had any help when I came through, so that's why I'm helping other people.
I've noticed this. I've heard this about both of you. I've heard that both of you never refuse to take a call. You've spoken to the most obscure people on a person who has 3 followers on a podcast, and you guys are there, right? And that's sort of the thing that you're getting at. Sorry to interrupt, but I had to add that in. And
yeah, I mean,
a lot of people would do.
No, I was very lucky that early on in my life, I was trying to become a comedy writer, and I had a famous comedian called Franklin Ajay, a brilliant comedian from America who lived in Melbourne, and I sent him a letter, stalked him down and sent him a letter, and he said, look, I don't think you qualify for my course, but if you want, we'll just get on the phone. And he spent 2 hours with me, and I was like a kid from the suburbs, no writing background, I think I'd already been kicked out of school once, and he spent 2 hours talking to me about writing and comedy, and I always thought, well, when I get to the next level, that's what I'm going to do, right? It doesn't matter how much, look, I know how much I had to struggle, right? I went through it. That's part of my identity. And, you know, ask Bharat, you get a couple of drinks into me, and I will name names of cricket journalists that went out of their way to make my life hell when I started, right? Some of them that, you know, Bharat is now telling not to wear suits. And I will live through that, but why would I want to make the next person's life hell? I already know what hell feels like. I already know what it feels like to walk into a press box and have half the press box slagging you off and saying you're not a real journalist, right? And you know exactly what I'm talking about here, Abhinav, because you've seen the same thing play out with cricket, right? And it plays out in the dream environment. And I suppose what I am trying to say is that's not what it has to be, right? That's not what it has to be. Just because we went through a tough environment doesn't mean that we can't build a better environment for the next. And I think that specifically within the SJN hearings in South Africa and what you hear from Azim Rafiq, it's people almost glorifying the fact that they survived a terrible system rather than going, you know what, this is a terrible system. Let's fix this. Let's make sure that there isn't other kids, no matter their backgrounds and their sexuality and their gender, whatever, that they actually have the ability to come through the system properly. You know, you shouldn't have, you know, there's a reason that women's cricket was held back in places outside of Asia. So in Asia it was held back culturally. Outside of Asia, it was held back because to play women's cricket, you basically needed to be incredibly wealthy because you weren't going to make any money and you basically had to give up a career. And there are a lot of women now like, it was so much better in the amateur day. Now it's all about, you know, women coming through. And it should be about that. Women should be paid to play cricket, right? And you see this again and again, and it's like this nostalgic thing of, it was hard, and we struggled really. I remember my dad saying once to my cousin saying, oh, well, you've got 2 jobs. Well, when I came up and I had 3. And I said, don't you want your niece to only have to worry about 1 job? Like, do you really want her to, like, match the amount of shit jobs that you had to have to make it in Australia? And I think that there's a real thing of that, and you know, you being able to go back and talk to the young players is really good, and that's why probably me and Bharat feel like we have to go and talk to people, right? We feel like we have to do that because we want to make it as open and as available as possible. And we all know, everyone on this, we're not being disingenuous. We still know that the people who are going to make it are going to be a combination of very talented and very hardworking, because you can't fake that, right? To make it in these sorts of jobs when, you know, I must get 500 to 1,000 people a year going, can you get me a job at Cricinfo? Bharat probably has 2,000 trying to get a job at Crickbuzz, right? Every time you walk out in the street, someone's like, have you seen my nephew play? Have you seen my niece play, right? We get that all the time. We understand that. What we don't want is a bunch of broken people because of the system. That's what we don't.
Yeah, I think I couldn't have put it better. It's fantastic what I've learned from the conversations that you guys have brought on. It's definitely something that's a bit concerning, most definitely, that all the problems that are going on in the cricket world. But I'm sure the trust will be regained. I'm sure the players will be thinking of how we can, as a community, open up a channel of communication and make sure that we're there for the next generation almost, and not just to protect what we have, but to give in and to enjoy the pleasure of someone coming up as well. I think that's been an incredible learning for me. Thank you so much, guys. It's your insights have been brilliant as always, and you've been honest and forthright as usual. I didn't expect any less from you both, but thank you so much for coming on my show.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jarrod.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bharat.